Today we're gonna make the most amazing meatloaf. This is not a dry, sad, boring meatloaf. This is tender and moist and flavorful. It has a little bit of sauce on the outside that kind of like locks in all of that moisture, and it just adds a tiny bit of sweetness to add to the savory. It's mind-blowingly good. If you're enjoying this video, hit subscribe below and click the bell icon to make sure that you get notified every time I post a new and amazing recipe. Let's get into it. So meatloaf is actually super easy, and there's really only one thing to prep, if you will, and that is our onion. So let's go ahead and slice that. We want a small dice because nobody wants to get a giant chunk of onion in their meatloaf. You want it to be interspersed and ooh, flavor. So I'm just gonna go ahead and cut both ends off. I'm gonna use this whole kind of small, it's like a small medium onion, depending on, what your grocery store decides is small. And then I'm gonna cut it like this, inside. We're just cutting kind of cross sections, and this is gonna make it easier to chop. So I'm just cutting little slivers now, like this, right? But I'm holding it so that it stays together. All right, so now I've got cut this way, and we're ready to kind of chop. Because I don't have the root attached, they're gonna fall apart a little bit. That's fine. We really just want a small medium dice here. It's meatloaf, so don't get stressed about your knife skills here. Just chop her up. Voila. All right, now we've got our onion, and I'm gonna take that. I'm gonna take it. I'm going to toss it into my bowl. Everything is going to go into this bowl except for the sauce. So I'm just going to go ahead and get this part out of the way so that I can move my cutting board and you can just see everything I'm doing. Okay, now we have our onions, and we are going to just put the rest of the ingredients into the filling. Into the meatloaf, whatever you want to call it. So what I have here is a mix of ground pork and veal and sirloin. It's the same ratio of each, but if you want to just use ground sirloin or ground chuck, whatever, you can totally do that as well. Okay, so we've got our meat, and now we're going to do 2 eggs. And we've got, this is a 1/2 cup of milk. There's no order in which to do this, okay? I am just doing the messy parts first. And then we're going to do a little bit of ground ginger. I know, you're like, what? Stop it. But just trust me, okay? And then saltines. Now, my grocery store only had unsalted top saltines, which seems like an oxymoron to me, but here we are. So I've got, it's about 20 saltines. It's about half of a packet, half of a sleeve, right? Boom. I have a big hand. And then I'm just going to take them in batches, and I'm going to crumble them up. Yeah. I'm going to make sure that they're pretty fine. I got saltines everywhere, didn't I? Nice. Okay. And the last ingredient is salt and pepper. So I like to use about a teaspoon of fresh ground pepper, but if you don't like pepper or whatever, I mean, I don't love pepper either, so just know that it does add to the flavor and it doesn't take over the flavor. Okay, all right, and then the last thing is salt. So I've got kosher salt here. Since my saltines are unsalted, I'm going to add a little bit more than I would suggest otherwise. Just because, there's no other flavoring here. The meat does not have any seasoning. Obviously my saltines have no seasoning. So our meatloaf is all the ingredients are in there, and I'm just going to mix it with my hands. So you can use a spoon, whatever you want to do. But I'm, kind of lazy, and I like to just get in there, and I find it also mixes it really nicely. So you can kind of squeeze up the meat. It is kind of cold. If you have gloves, it'd be a great time to use them. So go ahead and really truly mix it really nicely, because mixing the meat, especially with a starch and an egg, kind of activate some of those connective proteins, and it will help hold your meatloaf together and keep all the moisture and juices inside. So I do like to, I like to give it a good mix, and then it kind of gets like it's almost like sticky, like it doesn't want to come apart, and that's when you know that you've mixed it appropriately. I'm just gonna take a look and a feel and make sure that it has enough of the binder, so the saltines in it. You really just want to make sure that, sometimes you maybe use a little bit more onion, sometimes your eggs are just a touch bigger, or maybe you just eyeballed your milk a little bit and you went a little over, so no stress there. Just crumble a few more saltines in there. You want it to be, you don't want it to look dry, but you don't want it to look loose or wet either. But this is looking great, and I'm feeling excellent about it. So I'm going to delicately grab my pan. I am going to use this dish so that some of the fat will drain. You can also put it in a loaf pan. That works too. So if you do bake it in a loaf pan, go ahead and put a baking sheet underneath it, preferably lined with parchment, so that you don't have a giant mess in your oven. No oven messes here. Go ahead and shape your loaf here. Okay. So I just pat it in there. I like to make it nice and tall, like a tall meatloaf, not like a flat meatloaf. Nobody likes that. All right, so now our meatloaf is pressed in, and we're gonna make the sauce. You could totally do this beforehand, doesn't matter. It's pretty simple, and I like to double it just because I love a little extra sauce to drizzle over the top after it's done baking, but you don't have to. Okay, so we're gonna use ketchup and dark brown sugar and Worcestershire, that. Y'all know what I'm talking about. And that's all we're gonna use, that's it. So, this is a great time to use up any sort of like sad, dried dark brown sugar that you might have on hand. You know who you are. Because it happens, right? Yeah, I know. It's like a thing. So I have a little undried because I know that there's a lot of spaces in there. It's basically like doubling it as like a cup, unpacked. So like just kind of figure out what you think might have been the spaces. And then we're gonna do about a cup of ketchup. In she goes. Boop. And then about 2 tablespoons of this. This is integral, FYI. Keeps it from just tasting too sweet or too one note. So, do not skip. Do not skip. All right, and then we're gonna whisk that together. Obviously it's gonna be a little difficult because I've got giant chunks of undissolved brown sugar in here, which I am not going to stress about because we're going to melt it on the stove afterwards. So just give it a mix. Most of it is gonna kind of dissolve into the ketchup. If you didn't have dry dark brown sugar, it wouldn't take this long to whisk together. Okay, so I have very few lumps left in there, and it is time to put it on top. So I put about half on top of my meatloaf, and then I put about half in the pan, and then I'll heat it up. I just want to make sure it kind of runs down the side a little bit, because that's what's going to kind of lock in that moisture. It's going to keep it nice and moist and, well, delightful. So that's our meatloaf. She's ready to go in. And I'm going to put the rest of my sauce into this pan, this little pot here. So I'm just gonna go ahead and put this on low. We're gonna kind of simmer it, and it will kind of thicken a bit and almost start to caramelize, and that's perfect. I'm gonna pop a top on it. And meanwhile, our meatloaf is gonna bake. So our meatloaf, I preheat the oven to 350 degrees, and I'm gonna pop her in there, and she'll probably take like 35 to 40 minutes. It depends on how flat, how tall she is. But I'm gonna use a thermometer, a meat thermometer to check and see if she's done. There's pork in there, so we have to go to 165. Okay. And it's out. Yay! Our meatloaf is done. It cooked about 50 minutes. You want to just make sure that the pork in it is done if you are using the mix of the different types of meat. And you can see that the juices are running clear. Unfortunately, obviously to test the temperature, you have to poke it. And then we'll just we let it rest maybe about 10 minutes and kind of just let the juices reabsorb. I mean, obviously, if it's dinner time, just cut into it. It's gonna be delightful no matter what, which is what we are gonna do right now. All right, so I also have on the side here, I've got my reduced sauce that's been simmering while it was cooking. You can kind of just set it and forget it. Just make sure it doesn't burn. And then we are ready to cut into this. How excited are we? Ooh. Oh, steamy, so steamy. I'm gonna put a little bit extra sauce on there. Not necessary, but I love it. So good, so good. Oh, yes. It looks super moist, perfectly well done. There's onions that are throughout it. Oh my goodness gracious, can't wait. Yum. It's moist and flavorful. It's not dry or sad. No sad meatloafs. There's a little bit of sweetness from the topping that kind of locked in all of the moisture, but it's still super savory. Amazing. Yum.